Thurston County Board of County Commissioners work session for Wednesday, March 24th, 2021. It is 3:07 p.m. We are addressing a topic related to mid-cycle amendments to the 2020 and 2021 official dockets. Public comment follow-up. My name is Ty Menser, Chair of the Board of County Commissioners. We have Vice Chair Commissioner Gary Edwards, Commissioner Carolina Mejia, County Manager Amir Chavez, Director of Community Planning and Economic Development Josh Cummings, Community Planning Manager Jennifer Davis, and Maya Teeple from our CPED team. And like that is the conference. We will have public participation through our county YouTube channel or by conference call at 360-253-9020 in 1234. We are slated to 4 p.m. and I will turn it to County Manager.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioners. This is related to the mid-cycle amendments to the 2020-2021 official dockets. The board approved last spring, so every year, mid-year, have the opportunity to review some of the elements you have approved. I believe you made preliminary decisions a little over 20 days ago, and those preliminary decisions went in to receive public comment on the last 2 days. I believe today the staff is going to walk you through all the comments we have received, and then at some point we'll ask you to provide direction as to the next steps the staff is going to be outlining today.
Great. Thank you, County Manager. So Joshua Cummings, Director of Community Planning and Economic Development. I just want to say real quickly here, two notes of appreciation. First, to the CPED team for continuing a transparent and clear process for public participation. This is that opportunity where all of the community provides their comments to our staff, and we work to make sure that those comments come to you in a clear and concise manner so that the Board of County Commissioners can make their decisions going forward. And then the second note of appreciation, as we've talked about in the past, one of the main reasons we've been able to have so much success on these docketing items these past couple of years is because of the clear direction and prioritization from the Board of County Commissioners. So I wanted to say thank you for that and hope that we can continue that path forward, because that is what has been successful for our community. This is the Jennifer Davis and Maya Teeple show. So I'll turn it over to Jennifer for their next steps.
Thanks for setting that up. And again, Jennifer Davis, Community Planning Manager. So this is a follow-up to your February 18th briefing where we gave you that mid-cycle docket check-in. And at that time, the board moved forward 2 new proposals for consideration to add to the official dockets of comprehensive plan amendments and development code amendments. And those 2 proposals are what we're focusing on at today's briefing. So they are making permanent the interim amendments to the county's emergency housing ordinance, and also a new proposal to potentially change the land use and zoning of a property in rural Thurston County from rural resource residential use to rural resource industrial use. And again, we just concluded last Friday our 20-day written comment period that was triggered by that board direction to consider those 2 new proposals to potentially add to the docket. So today for the follow-up, I'm going to share my screen and walk you through. All right, can everybody see that? All right, as I said today, and everyone else has said, we're going to review the public comment that we received through that 20-day comment period, and it was significant. We're going to take another look at staff capacity to work on the proposals already on the dockets, or the potential to add new proposals to the dockets. Go over next steps if you do wish to add 1 or 2 proposals to the dockets, and answer any questions you may have about these 2 proposals that we are focused on today. Again, we are in the first stage for these 2 proposals of a 3-stage legislative process. So we are in the docketing process, and you are here. You are reviewing written comments that we received on new proposals for that docket. After today, if we get clear board direction on whether to move those proposals forward, We will continue down the ladder shown on your screen to amend the docket as necessary and officially adopt it. It would be an AIS process bringing to the board for a Tuesday adoption. And then we launch into the other phases of the legislative process, which is the full review by the public, the Planning Commission, and eventually the board, the full staff analysis, and all that goes into making a proposal into an actual amendment. So again, today you're at the stage of vetting. You're vetting these proposals. You're deciding not whether to adopt a proposal or not adopt a proposal. What you're deciding today is whether you have enough interest in this proposal to commit county resources and staff to work on it at some point over the coming year or two, depending on the priority you give the new proposal. So I'm going to turn this over to Maya to walk through the two amendments and then talk about the public comment received. And then there'll be plenty of time for kind of Q&A at the end about these amendments. So go ahead, Maya.
Jennifer, real quick, I have a question on your process. If anything is added, at what point would the board be discussing the priority of the various items with the new items added?
You can have that discussion today if time. You can have that discussion after you amend the docket. We could provide an opportunity with a follow-up work session to focus in on the priorities so we can see how far we get today. I think it might be important to have a little bit of that discussion today so we're understanding the path forward when we're adding this to the docket and what the expectation can be for the applicants potentially of one proposal in terms of timeline. But we have time to do that after we amend the docket as well. So it's kind of up to the board as when you have that discussion.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Jennifer. Maya Teeple, Senior Planner with Community Planning. So just to review the two proposals that were sent forward for public comment, just a recap from our last briefing on February 18th. The two are the Beaver Creek Land Use Amendment and associated rezoning, and also the Emergency Housing Ordinance. The Beaver Creek Land Use Amendment is a request from the Dolman Farm and HW Seattle to change the land use and zoning for roughly 390 acres. It's located along the I-5 corridor at the Maytown interchange. And currently the property is zoned rural residential and resource 1 unit per 5 acres. The request is to rezone the property to rural resource industrial. And in their application, they state that they'd like to do some sort of a warehouse or distribution facility. Just as a reminder, it's several parcels that make up this request, and there is a salmon-bearing stream on the property. It does meet locational criteria and is near the I-5 interchange, so they would be able to do the warehouse and distribution facility if they requested that rezone. Looking at emergency housing ordinance, this is a proposal that would consider making the interim regulations permanent. So we have our interim regulations that must be renewed every 6 months, otherwise they expire. And this would be a separate process from the renewal of those interim regulations. It would require planning commission review and then come back before the board. There would be 2 public hearings for citizen input. And if this proposal were added to the docket and final action were taken on it, then the interim ordinance would go away. Just to note that the interim ordinance would still need to be reviewed while this is being worked on if it were added to the docket. So there would be kind of 2 concurrent processes going on. Next slide, Jennifer. So the board has a scope of decisions for what they can do for the 2 proposals for which they accepted public comment on. The options before you are, you can either 1, select the proposal to be added to the official docket, and that, as Jennifer mentioned, would require an AIS and come before the board at an official Tuesday afternoon meeting. 2, keep the keep the proposal on the preliminary docket for possible future work. So that would mean that would be revisited during docket discussions in a later year. Or 3, drop the proposal from further consideration. And that is the board's broad legislative discretion and what they choose to do with these proposals. Next slide. So public comment received. We held a public comment period from February 16th through March 19th, and that's a little over our 20-day requirement. We received a total of 165 comments. And in addition to that, there were 4 late comments that we received, and those were included in a follow-up packet that was sent out to the commissioners. Almost all of the comments were related to the Beaver Creek proposal. We received 5 comments that were related to the emergency housing ordinance proposal. But just to go through some of the major themes in what we heard in public comment, there were 7 comments that were in support of adding the Beaver Creek land use amendment to the docket. And those comments that were in support stated that it's a good location, it's close to the freeway, opportunities for tax revenue is a positive for the county, that the change in the use from a cattle and dairy farm would reduce contamination to Beaver Creek, and also that the land use amendment could provide more jobs to the county. There were 155 comments that we received against the proposal, and some of the major themes that were noted in those comments were that the change does not align with the Growth Management Act. It does not align with the climate change plan that was recently adopted. Concerns that this is being fast-tracked and there's no need to fast-track the proposal. Concerns over designated critical habitat on the property, which benefits from agricultural grazing. Concerns over traffic, wildlife, noise, water, and air pollution. Concerns over the impacts to rural character. Notes of a major wildlife corridor that runs under the I-5 corridor at this location that would be a major loss, and that the proposal would lead to agricultural land loss and is contrary to the no net loss policy in the comprehensive plan. And then there were also some additional concerns that the applicant needed to provide more detail in their application, and that the county does not need more rural industrial lands, as is noted in the draft buildable lands analysis. And finally, another common theme that was noted is that the current docket item, CPA 16, which is the community-driven review of agriculture, should be the focus of both staff and community efforts at this time. I do want to note that one of the comments we received was from the applicant. That's comment number 11 in the public comment packet. And they did reference a state law, a statute under state law about a major industrial development. So that provides a little bit more context to their application. The process for a major industrial development is a little bit different than just a typical rezone. There are very specific standards and additional processes under state law for this, and Thurston County has never had to apply this specific section of state law. So there would be some upfront work that would be required to determine what the pathway is for the applicant, if that is what they're seeking, and there may be additional work for this type of a amendment or development. So moving into the emergency housing ordinance comments, we received 5 comments, and 1 was in support, stating that they were glad this issue is being tackled. 4 comments against, stating that they're against making these regulations permanent, or they are against any kind of homeless encampment in rural county. And staff did respond to those comments that stated they were against homeless encampments in rural county and noted that that is not what the interim regulations do. It's more of a flexibility in the permitting regulations. So we did provide clarity to those comments that we received. I just want to comment on, in addition to the many citizens that commented on the proposals before you today, we also received comments from a couple of big agencies and nonprofit groups like Conservation Northwest, Black Hills Audubon, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, Thurston Conservation District, and then retired personnel from Thurston County Department of Health, Department of Ecology, and private consultants and salmon biologists. So we had quite an extensive range of folks who submitted comment during our comment period, and that's great. We love seeing so many public comments. So questions on that before I move to the next slide? Great, let's go forth. Considerations. As the board thinks about what they would like to do with these two proposals, they may consider some of the things they might think about are the public comment that they received, staff capacity in processing the amendments, impact of the amendment to the county citizens and to the county. Does it have a broad impact or a narrow impact? Is it far reaching to many citizens, or is it just specific to the landowner? And does it align with the county's vision for the future, economic, social, and environmental policy?
So I'm going to jump back in and talk about just giving context to remind everyone you've seen this slide before, but we were able to update it from February 18th because we already have a lot of items on our existing official dockets. We had 24, now we're down to 21 because we were able to complete 3 items with the board adoption of some code amendments a couple of weeks ago. We're still in the same boat. We have more work than we can accomplish in this calendar year. But all of the items that are on the dockets do have staff assigned and timelines laid out. And we have a pathway of progress forward on each of the currently docketed items. We do have several big ticket items that are taking up a lot of that staff capacity: the agricultural lands review project, the shoreline master program update, a major update to the Grand Mound sub-area plan, and all 3 joint plans with our northern city partners, Lacey, Olympia, and Tumwater. All of those are underway in various stages, and adding new proposals to the docket may require us to take a look at priorities, may require the board to consider where those new proposals lie within this existing work. But we're continuing to make good progress, so that's the positive news. And the next steps, and then we can kind of open it up to questions. Again, today we'd like to receive your direction on these 2 proposals, whether to add it to the official docket, bring back an AIS to do so, wait and see, keep it on the preliminary docket. We'll revisit it. The next time we would revisit this would be probably February 2022. Or remove it for future consideration, which is always an option for the board within your legislative authority. And then talk about priorities as time permits. And that concludes the presentation. So we have plenty of time to have a discussion, and I'll stop sharing so we can kind of see each other better, but I'm happy to go back if anyone wants to see a certain slide.
I think there's plenty of time, Jennifer. We'll see. So you ready for us?
We're ready.
All right, Commissioner Mejia, this first crack of the.
So can someone else go first, just because as the new kid in town, I would like to see at least both of you, and then I can jump in if that's okay. Sure.
Yep.
Okay.
Edward, you're up.
I didn't get that. Did you call on me? I'm up.
Yep,
Okay. I would like to add to the official docket the Beaver Creek issue. And the reason I would like to add it is because then we can look in to find out which facts are true and which facts aren't true, and hear from the potential developer just what is coming, so it won't be speculation anymore. We'll be presented with the facts, and all sides can have their say in public, and hopefully it will be better for water quality, mainly the nitrates that are taking place now in Beaver Creek. And I think it'll be a good potential for economic development while still protecting the environment. And I think this is a good opportunity to, if staff does not have the time to work on it, to farm it out and let a professional group that does do this type of activity do it under the oversight, I guess, of staff. So that's kind of where I'm at on that. On that issue, do you want me to go on to the homeless portion?
Well, if you've got questions, I was going to just circle around for questions, and then we can kind of get to comments or try to persuade each other or whatever we're going to do with that. But if you have I have a few questions. If you have questions about the homeless thing, then go ahead and ask them, and then we'll circle back if you want to make a comment later.
Okay, I didn't have any questions on it. I just had comments if you want.
Okay, so let me ask a few questions about the Beaver Creek, just because I had a chance to review all the public comment. Some of it I gotten because it came, you know, we get things in all sorts of ways. Sometimes it's a letter to the commissioners or an email to the commissioners, or it comes in straight to the community planning. So I've seen a lot of this, but not all of it until I went through it really meticulously. And so I have a few questions. Several people bring up, this is for Jennifer, several people bring up the GMA. And I think at a previous meeting, you said there'd be some work to sort of look at the GMA issues. And so I guess sitting here today, do we know do we know where we sit with GMA, or is that something that would have to be studied by our staff to sort of answer the questions and concerns raised in the public comment?
I think that would be something that would have to be studied by our staff, especially since we've received additional, more specific information from the applicant about the potential to pursue a major industrial development, which is a specific pathway under state law. And so we'd have to look at what that means in terms of implementation, what kinds of studies and research that takes to kind of meet the test of being permittable outside of an urban growth area. So there is a bit of a test in the state law that you need to prove that you do not have capacity within your urban areas to accommodate that type of major industrial development before citing something like that in a rural area. Or the other part of the test is if you want to do a major type of industrial development in your rural area, it needs to be linked to a resource use. So those are kind of two tests. Either one can work. It sounds like based on the applicant's material, they provided initial information with statements about the lack of industrial capacity in the current UGAs, but we would have to conduct that research to make sure it met that test. And then we would also have to look at our own policies and our comprehensive plan that are adopted under the Growth Management Act to see how those align with this proposed rezone, taking a chunk of land it's not designated ag land. It's currently used for an agricultural purpose, but it could be used for a number of rural resource or residential development purposes under its current zoning. And we just have to do the work to show our case to be compliant with the Growth Management Act, that the change of that land use into something that's more industrial makes sense for the county and why. I think if we do the work, provide the rationale, there's no big red stop sign at this point around that, but it's going to take some looking, and it's going to take using our legal staff to help advise as well about what kind of level of information we need to provide in order to make this kind of a major rural land use change.
Is that handled at a threshold, like a threshold level? I mean, there's so many, if you put the concerns into buckets, there's a lot of different buckets, right? There's water and groundwater impact, there's wildlife corridor, there's agricultural loss, there's et cetera, et cetera. So I would hate to see our staff or the applicant or whoever going through all these different studies if they can't even get through the first gate of showing that they can meet these GMA. So is there a way to structure the work so that those questions are answered before we get to all this other stuff? If we need to shut it down early, we shut it down early because they just can't get through the gate.
I think that would be a wise way to structure it. And I think we definitely would need to probably, if you chose to put this on the docket, which would allow us to devote resources to this, I mean, the first step would be, I think, sitting down with the applicant and getting very much more clarity about the pathway they're seeking, sitting down with legal staff and getting more clarity about the steps we need to take that would be maintain compliance with the right part of the state law, and then lay out that pathway forward. And then we could actually have another check-in with the board as we went along. But the first step would need to be to docket it.
The second thing on my list is there were several comments related to spot zoning and a suggestion by somebody that would be illegal or subject us to liability if we were to engage in spot zoning. Can you explain what that's about?
So spot zoning is a legal standard where you're not supposed to sort of just cherry pick individual properties and rezone them for a specific person's need. But there's a lot that goes into determining whether something's spot zoning or not. For a major rezone proposal like this, which is talking about fulfilling a need for more industrial lands in the county to serve broad county purposes, I don't imagine that fits the category of spot zoning. And I think that's one of the things we would have to be looking into when we were talking with our legal staff and pursuing this. The analysis of this project is to make sure it's not spot zoning and that it's truly responding to an identified need for additional industrial lands in the region or in the county or whatever that sort of scope turns out to be. So I am convinced that on its face, it is not spot zoning. I think consultation with our legal staff as we went through the process would be important for us to do.
Did we get any input from the agricultural community? Because I heard they had a discussion about this at their last meeting, and I don't know, there was a reference to a letter that I heard, but I didn't see a letter from them. So do you know anything about their discussion or their opinion?
Yes, and Commissioner Mejia, you may have still been at the meeting, so you may weigh in as well. But yes, at their last week's Agriculture Advisory Committee meeting, so this is the advisory committee the board appoints members to advise on agricultural policy issues. This proposed land use amendment came up, and there had been, I did not see it, but there had been a letter drafted by members of that committee for consideration by the body of the committee. And there was a robust discussion about whether or not to submit that comment letter to the board for consideration. And at the end of the day, the decision was not to submit that letter. The landowner was in attendance at that meeting and was able to state his case about what he was looking forward to do with his dairy farm and his property, and why the land use designation was something he was supportive of. But there was discussion about, the juxtaposition of trying to preserve and conserve ag land, but also the need to support farmers and their ability to make economic decisions in their own interest. And so that was the discussion. At the end of the day, the Ag Committee chose not to submit a committee letter to the Board of County Commissioners. And I defer to Commissioner Mejia if she had more to add on that discussion.
I think you hit it really spot on. I think the conversation ended in how can we support farmers and incentivize our local farmers to keep, farming and not to sell the land. And I think it was a very fruitful, very robust conversation, as Jennifer stated. If you haven't checked it out, I would recommend for the other commissioners to check in on the recording.
Jennifer, by any chance, did they talk about, there's several options and a housing development on that property. It's happened to a lot of dairy farms that just can't make it anymore. Was that brought up?
They talked about a lot of other potential uses that the land could go to, everything from being partially developed into housing, but being, retained in farming, being working with a land trust to do a conservation easement on part of the land. There were a lot of ideas that were talked about for potential other uses of the land. And, that was part of the discussion, but there wasn't a conclusion on that.
Okay, thank you.
And I think the property owner said he wanted to sell his land in one piece, and he wasn't really interested in selling it in plots just because of the timeline that it would take for him to do this. So I think that was several options were brought up by several people, and I think he's just looking for a way to, be done with dairy farming.
Okay, thank you.
Is this so a dairy farm, not a farming expert, but a dairy farm is, I would imagine, could be done on a greater diversity of land versus where you're trying to actually use the soil to grow crops of one type or another, because you're not planting in the ground. I'm not sure what kind of considerations you look at when you're trying to start a dairy farm, but I guess my question is this land particularly suitable for other types of farming, or was it just land that was expedient for his dairy farm?
He did make statements about the quality of the soil and that it was not good for growing of crops, that it was good for grazing cows because of the nutrient additions he's made to the soil and to the landscape. So that was the property owner's perspective. It's not land that we have designated as long-term agriculture land, but agriculture is definitely a permitted use, like it is in all of our rural residential resource zoning districts. And there's lots of different types of ag out there, some of which don't need rich tillable soil to be successful. So those are kind of the nuggets I took away from that conversation.
But what you're saying, that the way it's zoned now, if he sold it, he's looking to sell, which it sounds like he is, and I heard that too at some point, then there's no guarantee it would stay agricultural because the zoning currently allows for different uses. It's not agricultural zoning.
That's right. It's rural resource / residential, 1 unit per 5 acre zoning. So it could be developed to residential uses, or there are numerous special uses allowed in that district as well. It's different parcels, so different parcels could be taken in different directions under that zoning district. But industrial use in a major warehouse development would not be one of those uses that could happen under the current zoning.
I'll ask one more question, then I'll go to Commissioner here. So this issue about a wildlife corridor and animals being able to only get under the I-5 in this particular area, I was a little confused by that when I matched it up with the map. Because it looks like in terms of the interchange is sited directly in an industrial zone. And the area that's proposed to be added is southwest of it. And I'm wondering how the addition of the proposed addition would affect, I guess, the use of that land, that added land. If there's a warehouse there, that's obviously a block. But in terms of the use of the interchange, if there's a crossing in that purple square, that wouldn't change because that's already zoned industrial. I'm just trying to make sure I understand the scope of this wildlife corridor.
Right. I think you're looking at the information correctly. I'm not sure exactly where that undercrossing is. And I know that when I spoke to folks from, I think it was Audubon and some other folks, I mean, there's been a kind of a long-term vision in the environmental community that this is an important area where you can have cross-county, east-west wildlife migration. And so this is a key spot where they can actually go under I-5. And so it's a vision, and it's not something we have designated on any maps, but it's something that I know folks have put energy into and thought into in the community. And so they bring up concerns about if these adjacent properties develop in a certain way without further block the opportunity to access that crossing point in the area and make that corridor useful to wildlife. So that would be something we would look into, a number of that and water quality issues and endangered species issues, and you name it, would all be part of the analysis, the environmental analysis that would go into looking at this potential rezone.
Commissioner Mejia, just about to you. Do you have any questions or comments at this point?
No questions. I think you've asked all the questions I was thinking about in regards to the comments that we've received. So none at this point. When does the discussion start?
Yeah, well, I mean, let's just go into it. I mean, it's Commissioner Edwards, I think, made his position pretty clear. Do you have a position on these?
Well, I was just going to say that one of the unique characteristics of this property is it's got a interstate interchange right there, and it's got a railroad. And that's what makes it so inviting for some type of industrial application, I guess. You know, so it's got an infrastructure that's right. Whether the other things are right or not, I guess we won't know if we don't look at it.
Yep. Go ahead, Commissioner Hill.
So one of the many things I heard, and I know there was a lot of confusion, is that this was going to be kind of like the end of the process. And this is just step 4 out of 19 steps that I counted. So I want to make that clear to the public. This is not the end of the discussion. This is just the very start. I know Jennifer made a good point in the Ag Committee because there was a lot of confusion on why this hadn't been brought up to the Agricultural Advisory Board before that time. And Jennifer made a good point on telling them this is just the beginning stages. This is just a part of the beginning process. And so again, we're only step 4 out of 19. I went ahead and counted all the processes before and how many times people will have a time to do public comment. In regards to Beaver Creek, I think it should go on to the docket. I think just this is privately owned land, and I think the private owner should have the chance to see what all his options are. If he decides to go a different route, I think that's, you know, in his purview. But at least we should see if this is even a viable option for him. And in terms of losing ag land, it was one of my main concerns. It's 300 acres of ag land that we would be losing. And I just, you know, it just goes to show how much we need to incentivize farming here in Thurston County. How can we make sure that our local farmers, you know, can keep doing this and can have a survival out of this? And that's why I believe, you know, an agricultural coordinator or liaison would be great in this point, because they would give farmers all their different options. In terms of the environmental impact, another concern of mine, I think in this process, it's something that we'll be able to find out what would the environmental impact on wildlife be, on our environment, on Beaver Creek. So I would like to see, you know, I appreciate everyone who reached out. I appreciate everyone who set a meeting with me and who sent me emails, you know, either for or against the proposal. You know, I always feel like there's 3 sides to every story, those in support, those against. And, you know, I feel like this is the 3rd stop of the triangle. It's just to see what can actually be done. So I'm in support of adding Beaver Creek for the docket process, just to at least see if it's even an option for Mr. Dolman. And with that, and then, do you want me to proceed with the emergency housing ordinance?
Yeah, go ahead. We've got 15 minutes. Go ahead and let us know what you think there, and we'll just go around the horn.
I believe that one should be added to the final docket as well. I'll leave it at that. That way I'm not taking too much.
Okay, Commissioner Edwards.
On the emergency housing, I have talked with numerous citizens that do not think we should be bailing out the city of Olympia for encouraging people to come here from all around the United States. And now they've become saturated. And now those folks, those homeless individuals are moving out into the unincorporated area, and it's not sitting well with unincorporated residents. So I am not in favor of moving ahead with that. I would rather that we make sure we have things like treatment for mental health and drug abuse and holding people accountable in place before we move ahead with this type of an ordinance. So I'd want to make sure we had the treatment ready. We don't have it. We haven't if there's a three-legged stool, one of the legs will be missing. So that's kind of where I'm at on that. And I am in favor of the Beaver Creek thing being put on initially.
That's great. So I favor the housing ordinance. I've had 2 years worth of comments about it, so I'm not going to belabor that. It's a tool in the toolbox, and it should be there. The Beaver Creek, obviously there's quite a bit of concern about the substance of the rezone, but we're not being asked today to approve a rezone. We're being asked to, decide whether an applicant gets a technical review of a proposal. Not a fan of warehouse projects, and that was made very clear in comments I made on the record in the Rocky Prairie, Miller, Sylvania proposal. I've opposed multiple warehouse projects, in fact, in the last 2 years, but I think that for the reasons my seatmates have pointed out, this application has elements that require some further analysis. Hugging the I-5, you have a rail line going through the middle of it. It's adjacent to existing industrial zoning. I don't know, maybe this will allow us to preserve other less suitable areas. I don't know that that's how it's going to shake out, but I think the types of objections we're getting a lot of them are very technical regarding hydrology and groundwater impacts and the wildlife and endangered species analysis. And I want to see that information. For example, one of the commenters, I wrote it down, but one of the commenters against said, I quote, "What are the impacts of this proposal to the aquifer, Beaver Creek, traffic and air pollution?" Close quote. Well, that's exactly what I want to know too. And that's what, I don't think it's fair when we don't know all those answers to reject an applicant's proposal without looking at the elements, just speculate based on speculation. That's not a good process either. There's a rare occasion where we can tell a project is just not appropriate. And Miller, Sylvania, North Point, Rocky Prairie was one of those, but this isn't quite as clear cut to me, so I'd like to see a little bit more information. I can say that I'm not, since Jennifer invited to comment on priorities, I am not interested in revisiting docket priorities. This proposal does not need to jump the line or be fast-tracked, as a number of the commenters pointed out. It should take its place at the end of the line based on staffing capacity and a matter of fairness to the other projects that are ongoing and are earlier in line, and those applicants need to get their projects done. So it'll be going on the end of it should just wait in its place at the end of the line, but it deserves at least a threshold analysis for us to decide whether there's any merit to this relative to other proposals. So I guess I'm in favor of both of these at this juncture.
And
So maybe just to encapsulate the vote, if I may, before you discuss the priorities in a little more detail.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is related to the Beaver Creek proposal is a unanimous vote to include it on the docket. Related to the emergency housing, it is a split vote. Commissioner Mejia and Commissioner Messer would like to add it to the docket. Commissioner Edwards, no. So it's a 2-1.
Okay. Yes, and then like I say, my suggestion is that the two new proposals, both of them, take their place at the end of the line. I don't see any reason to change the previous board's priority. We're mid-cycle, and those projects are, for the most part, in progress. That's just my 2 cents. I'll turn to Commissioner Mejia.
I'm in complete agreement with what Commissioner Messer just said. I feel that both the Beaver Creek and the emergency housing should go to the end of the line and wait for their turn. I feel it would just be the fair thing to do, especially with all the other projects that are currently waiting in line. And I know that there's a lot of investment in the ag review. So, I mean, for me, that would be my priority, number one, to get that through. But I think adding these two new projects, they should go to the end of the line.
Commissioner Edwards.
Yes, I guess I'm going to have an opposing point of view on that as far as having outside help come in and help our planning folks. Many jurisdictions allow an applicant to come in and pay for that information that we're all asking about right now. They present the information, they know the growth management rules, our staff could oversee it, wouldn't cost our folks anything, and we could move ahead with an economic development proposal that could really make a difference in our economic situation in Thurston County. So I would propose that we allow the developer on this particular activity, and I don't know that we've got a developer yet, but I know those folks in those professional fields are very capable of doing everything that our staff can do, besides they've got the resources to do it. Here we've heard from our staff that we do not have the resources to do it. So then this could linger for, I don't know, another 2 or 3 years before we get to it. So we're not solving anybody's problem by delaying the inevitable. If we all say we agree that we'd like to hear some answers, we might not be here to hear the answers by the time they're all done. So that's my position on it. And maybe we could have further discussion on that at some point down the road, because I do think there's merit to it.
I think we were, I think, Ramiro, I'll ask you and Josh, but I think we were planning to sort of address that in a more generic way at some later point. I don't know when, in terms of what parts of the process third parties would be involved in and what would be the considerations.
Yeah, that is correct, sir. Maybe that may require additional conversation, and this is more related to you know, some of the process improvements that Josh is looking into his overall program. So we can organize another briefing just to put some thought behind this and have a robust conversation with the board. I'm sure that is going to be the case. So related to the priorities, what I'm hearing is Commissioner Menser, Commissioner Mejia would like to keep the existing priorities in place, and the Beaver Creek and the emergency housing will take place at the end of those priorities. So whatever the number priority that will be. So that's what I'm hearing. Commissioner Edwards stated the contrary. He would like to revisit that. So I have a 2-to-1 on that. So we're moving on that direction. So the next step in the process will be, you will see an AIS that will be reflecting the decisions the board made today. And I will work with Josh as to organize another briefing to see how outside consultants can be part of this process, regardless of the priorities that you have already established.
I would just make a final comment there that I got outvoted significantly in the priority setting last year. So the priority list wasn't my priority list, but the board collaboratively gave input, and we kind of collaborated, or you know, we synthesized all of our priority lists into a master list for staff. And I don't think it's fair to staff to be reshuffling their priority when they're in the middle of working. There would have to be an unusually good reason to do something like that. And we don't have any such reason now. And that's just my philosophy in the future. The board's going to set those priorities, and we need to stick to them unless there's a really compelling reason. So I appreciate that, Ramiro. And if the later discussion changes our feeling about anything, the board can certainly revisit. But at this point, I want staff to feel like they've got their clear direction as they move forward. Are we good? No, go ahead, Josh.
So thank you. I appreciate the county manager. We will work to provide another briefing in terms of the consultant conversation. One of the questions that we'd had just previously was really, what was the question from the commissioners? Was it hire out a contractor consultant for the process or for the technical review? And so having some of those comments from Commissioner Edwards today has helped as we think about the specificity of the Beaver Creek application. You know, we want to do it in sequence. We want to have this conversation today about whether or not to move forward on these 2 items. Really appreciate this conversation with the Board of County Commissioners and the direction. And then, yes, as the county manager stated, we'll have a follow-on briefing in terms of the how, if there is an opportunity for contracting and some of the work for Beaver Creek, or more generically, as we think about consultants on the process, or the technical aspects, similar to like we did with the lake process. Thank you. But again, my appreciation for the support from the commission and the good discussion today. This is exactly what we'd hoped for in terms of moving the process forward.
Okay, Samir, are we good to go?
Good to go. All that in less than an hour.
All right, Jennifer was right. We had enough time.
Yeah.
For once, I was right.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
job. Thank you.
Well,